Hi guys, it's Michelle, and today's video is going to be yet another true crime video for you guys. These are some cases that I find incredibly interesting and absolutely terrifying. So without further ado, let's get into it. Also, if you have any true crime cases that you would like me to cover, please leave them in the comments below. I would love to talk about them. If you guys want me to do like one case at a time in a video, please let me know as well, because obviously a lot of these cases have extra information. This one is probably just going to be an extra long video because of the information from each of these cases, but whatever you guys think is more interesting, I don't know. I heard people like that I do like 3 separate cases in one video, but then I also heard people say that you would like it better with just one per video. Let me know. Nonetheless, the first story I want to talk about revolves around a couple named Harold Dean Klaus Jr. We're going to refer to him as Dean because that is what he went by, and Tina Gail Lynn. In 1978, they were both living with their families in New Smyrna Beach, Florida. So Dean's sister was actually dating and later married Tina's older brother. So that's how Dean and Tina met. Dean and Tina began dating and what was described as a whirlwind romance. The two married on June 25th of 1979. The couple gave birth to their daughter Holly Marie on January 24th of 1980. Both Tina and Dean were described as very devoted parents to baby Holly, and people around them claimed that they were great parents and they really cared about their daughter. The couple decided to move their growing family to Louisville, Texas in the summer of 1980. Something really strange that happened when they were in Texas is in October of 1980, they began to lose contact with their family. This was apparently incredibly out of character for Tina and Dean. Their family began to get very concerned with it all. On January 12th of 1981, the Klauses were sadly found dead in a swampy woodlands north of Houston, Texas, around 250 miles away from their last confirmed address. Now, at the time and up until 2021, which we will get into later, the bodies went unidentified, so this was never notified by the family. The family just considered the couple to be missing. The couple that was found in the woods was a Jane and John Doe situation. The woman was strangled and the man was bound and beaten. It is believed that Tina was murdered first, and then Dean was trying to attempt to save her, and that was when he got murdered as well. Also recovered at the scene of the crime was a bloodied towel and a pair of gym shorts. It is really unclear whether or not Dean and Tina had been killed at the scene of the crime or if they had been taken there after. The case went completely cold until July of 2011, and DNA evidence started to become a little bit more popularized, a little bit more used. Police department decided to extract DNA from the bodies. Originally, it was to find out if the couple were related to each other, which obviously they were not. The case still remained cold after that point because there was nothing in the database that matched anything. In late 2020, the case was given to a California-based genetic genealogy organization, Identifiers International. Forensic genealogists Misty Gillies and Allison Peacock were assigned to the case. And when they were looking in the database for matching DNA to either of these people, they discovered a family in Kentucky who had relocated to Florida that matched the male. So from this family, they were actually matched specifically to a man with the last name Klaus. When they were able to be publicly identified as Tina and Dean Klaus, ironically on January 12th of 2021 was the day that they publicly announced this, on the exact 40th anniversary of the day that their remains were discovered. After Dean and Tina's bodies were identified, I think the main question that people, mostly Dean and Tina's families, were, where is baby Holly? Because she was never found with her parents at that time. There was no sight of a baby anywhere. Genealogist Allison Peacock and her organization launched a Hope for Holly DNA project as part of their efforts to try and find Holly. Especially interesting because whoever Holly was now probably had no idea that any of this could have happened to her. She would never remember that. Several women across the country were submitting their DNA to see if they were Holly. Like, I guess people who were adopted didn't know who their birth parents were. XYZ, a lot of people came forward to get DNA tested to see if they were Holly. None of them were a match until June 7th of 2022. Another weird coincidence, that is actually Holly's father Dean's birthday. And that was when they discovered that Holly was in fact alive and well. Holly was completely unaware of her past identity, and it was discovered by her adoptive parents that her birth certificate was actually sealed. But once the police opened this, discovered that baby Holly was left in a church in Arizona Arizona shortly after her parents' murders. It was apparently left by two women who were wearing white robes and barefoot and claimed to be part of some nomadic religious group. According to the Klaus family, Dean had somewhat of a history of interacting with some of these religious cults, but once he began dating Tina, he began to drift away from any of that. During December of 1980, which is now predicted to be the time the murders of Dean and Tina actually occurred, family members of Dean and Tina were actually contacted by a woman who refers to herself as Sister Susan. Sister Susan said that she was interested in returning the couple's car to their family. At that point, Dean and Tina had already been out of contact with their family for over 2 months, so they were willing to meet with the Sister Susan person. So they met up at the Daytona racetrack in Florida. Multiple elements about the meeting were super weird, did not make any sense whatsoever, and really freaked out the family. For example, the group arranged to meet at night. There were several members of the religious group present, but Sister Susan was the only one who spoke. Family members of Dean and Tina were told by Sister Susan that they had joined this religious group and were no longer interested in worldly contact with their families. And Sister Susan also asked for the families to donate $1,000 to the group. Police were actually notified of the meeting in advance. No formal police report of the incident was recovered. Of course, after all of this happened, after there was still no contact between Dean, Tina, and their families, Dean's mother, Donna, decided to call the police and try to file a police report saying that they believe that Dean and Tina were missing. But unfortunately, the authorities very much ruled this out and wrote it off because of the event where Sister Susan met up with the couple's families, actually returning their car and telling them, hey, your kids joined a cult. They will no longer be talking to you. Police just assumed that that was true and decided that there was nothing to be further investigated within this case. The couple's families said that they never believed that their children joined a cult. They just felt like it was so unlike Tina specifically, but also even like, you know, they had a baby now, they were moving on and trying to make a life for themselves out in Texas. It just seemed super unlikely that they would join a cult. Now it's actually believed that the car was intentionally returned in this manner so that it would kind of delay or stop a formal police investigation, which ended up working, which is so scary because I would never even like think of that. It worked. It's also believed that the religious group who returned the car are the same people who dropped baby Holly off at that church in Arizona. What's scary to me is that nobody has any idea who these people are, who this group of people who were essentially a cult who literally killed people and then tried to cover it up. No one knows who they are. And no one knows what happened. No one knows why they decided to spare Holly's life. It just remains unsolved, and unfortunately it probably will for a very long time. But it is a little bit of a happy ending, of course, because baby Holly is still alive and well. It is so scary regardless. Stuff like this really freaks me out. I've thought about doing a video on cults, but honestly they scare me a little too much. I've wanted to do a whole video about Scientologists, but like they low-key scare me a little. So like, I don't really know. If you want me to do it, let me know. The next story is about a woman named Karen Welch. Karen Welch is a single mother. She was living in Marlboro, New Jersey. She received a very horrifying phone call on Christmas Eve of 1997. At around 1 a.m., she picked up a phone call and the person was using a voice changer, and it was the same voice as the movie Scream. And they asked, do you like scary movies? I do, I'm watching you. Fuck that. I don't know. I've never seen any of the Scream movies. Apparently this is a quote from Scream movies. I don't really do scary movies. I would lose my mind. And you know, still confused about this to this day. This is such a side note, but in 2009, on the day that Michael Jackson died, before I knew that he died, because I had just woken up from a nap, my parents were out of the house. The phone rang. I answered the phone. Swear to God, it was Michael Jackson's voice. Said, it's Michael Jackson. I call my mom and I'm like, I'm so scared right now. I just got a phone call from Michael Jackson saying it was Michael Jackson. And my mom was like, he's dead. Did the ghost of Michael Jackson call me? Maybe, but anyway, besides the point. I would freak out. That's like not cool. She kind of just assumed it was a prank call. Obviously she was a little creeped out by the nature of it, but she decided to write it off for now. But unfortunately for Karen, the calls remained constant. She was getting 10 to 12 phone calls every single day. Sometimes they were using the voice changer. Sometimes this person would just call and hang up. It was terrifying. Every time Karen would change her phone number, the stalker ended up being able to find it again, which is wild because like in 1997 it wasn't that easy to find someone's phone number. Like how'd you even, I don't even know how they found it. One Sunday afternoon, Karen and her son were driving home from the mall, and Karen noticed a car was kind of following her home. She didn't really notice it until she pulled in to her townhouse driveway, and all of a sudden the truck came behind her and blocked off her driveway. So she was parked like this and the truck was like this, that she was unable to get out, which is really freaking creepy. Why would she want to walk from the car to her at the house with her son when there's clearly someone out there who like wants to kill her? Like that's a little fucking scary. But she didn't have any other choice. She grabbed her son and ran inside. This was when Karen called the police again, and they didn't take it seriously once again and pretty much said, we can't really do anything until the stalker does something bad to hurt you, which is such a terrible thing that people are told and still told, because it's pretty crazy, but they are.
Basically find out that no one's gonna help me. It was shocking. I guess they were waiting for something to happen to me. It was insane. It was absolute insanity.
Like these phone calls were going on for 11 months and the police said that they just couldn't do anything about it. But it drives me so crazy. It just is so frustrating, but basically it's because the caller used different burner phones, so they were never able to track a location. Karen was just so distressed over the situation. At this point, 11 months had gone by where Karen was being tortured by this Scream impersonator stalker man. Police just recommended that she get out of town for a bit. It was her birthday coming up, so she decided to take her son on a trip to Disney World in Orlando, Florida. She was having a great time, and she gets back to the hotel room, and while she's in her hotel room, she receives a call from the Scream voice singing happy birthday to her. Like I said, since the stalker was using a burner phone, they were unable to track the location. This is when Karen began to become extremely terrified, because not only did they know where she lived, but they knew her birthday. They somehow knew what hotel she was staying at and were able to, you know, call her, get her room. It's just absolutely terrifying. Like that is a nightmare. It was especially terrifying because Karen considered herself somewhat of a homebody. She was busy taking care of her son. She was a working mother. Really had nothing crazy going on with her social life. So this narrowed down the list of people that could be the stalker to a very small amount of people whom she trusted, and she really felt like we're not the stalker. So she was ultimately very confused. At this point, the police were even on board with the theory that this was someone that Karen knew personally, which I feel like would be extremely distressing. Honestly, this is like a real life Pretty Little Liars situation, but not fun. Surprisingly, after Karen returned home from Disney, she stopped getting calls from the stalker. Karen began finally relaxing. She was no longer getting calls. This lasted for 4 years, and at that point she thought she was in the clear. Until one day she came home with her screen door sliced open with a nail. There were also a bunch of footprints all around the windows of the house, and Karen began receiving the calls once again. I thought it was pretty interesting that a criminal psychologist named Michelle Ward talked about this case.
To me, the fact that he went away for such a long period of time means that he probably recognized that his behavior was a lot less than sane. However, he's an addict. He's addicted to the stalking of Karen. This is his drug, and he wants that rush again. He
just needed to stalk her, needed to scare the shit out of her. He loved it. He got a rush from it, and eventually began picking up again, which is really fucking terrifying. So now Karen was getting more calls than ever, 18 to 20 calls a day, and it's 2009 at this point, 12 years from the original call from the stalker. Karen received a phone call from the stalker that was actually threatening her life.
Back, baby. You're real hot. Stalk your ass.
Yeah, I got your number, and that's not all.
Which this was what made the police investigation move forward, because now this was a formal threat. On January 15th of 2010, investigators were finally able to figure out who the stalker was, because he ended up slipping up and using his own phone number. So one of the phone numbers traced the police back to a man named Joe Platti. He was a well-respected, seemingly normal member of the neighborhood. He was married, he had children, he had no criminal record whatsoever. And the weirdest part about it is that Karen didn't even know him. She had seen him a few times, she knew of his existence, but she had no association with him whatsoever. Authorities began to come up with this theory that Joe had seen Karen out and about in town and became obsessed with her. Joe admitted to the police that he was the stalker and he was set to go give a formal interview. However, instead of doing so, he duct taped himself into a shed behind his house and lit the shed on fire. So he committed suicide to avoid facing arrest, which is so freaky because it leaves Karen with so many unanswered questions. Now she will just absolutely never know why this man was stalking her so intrusively and crazily for 12 years. I don't know how you deal with something like that and not have like the closure of understanding what happened. It would just drive me crazy and I would feel like I would always feel on edge no matter what, because then I would feel like he was haunting me. Maybe that's just because I'm scared of ghosts, but I don't know. I'm happy that Karen now has peace of mind because it just would be so devastating to have a stalker. Pretty fucking scary. All right, so the last true crime story we're going to be talking about today is the murder of Sherry Rasmussen. February 24th of 1986, Sherry Rasmussen was found dead in her apartment that she shared with her husband, John Rutten, in Van Nuys, California. She had been beaten and shot 3 times in a struggle. The LAPD initially considered this case a botched burglary. They were unable to identify a suspect and the case went cold for many years. Sherry's father actually always believed and always told the police that he thought that LAPD detective Stephanie Lazarus had something to do with his daughter's murder. Sherry's husband John and Stephanie had somewhat of a relationship before he met Sherry, and a little bit during, but we'll get into that. So Stephanie and John met when John was a undergrad at UCLA in 1981. John was a mechanical engineer major and Stephanie was a poli-sci major. Stephanie was extremely weird. She would steal John's clothes while he was in the shower and take pictures of him while he was sleeping. Just a little creepy. John never considered the two to be in a relationship, more of like a friends with benefits situation. He claimed that the two hooked up probably 20 to 30 times between 1981 and 1984. John ended up moving to Los Angeles for work after school and Stephanie followed him and became a LAPD officer. John later met Sherry Rasmussen, who was a graduate from Loma Linda University for critical care nursing. She was the director of nursing at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center. Stephanie Lazarus and John remained friends throughout the entirety of Sherry's relationship with John. Stephanie even threw him a surprise party on his 25th birthday, and Stephanie was apparently unaware at the time that John had been dating anyone, but specifically that he was seeing someone pretty seriously, and that was Sherry. Stephanie was distraught when she found this out. She even wrote a letter to John's mother in August of 1985 saying, quote, "Truly in love with John and the past year has really torn me up. I wish it didn't end the way it did, and I don't think I'll ever understand his decision." And in her own personal journal, she wrote, quote, "I really don't feel like working. I just found out John is getting married." So around this time, Stephanie visited John at his condo and the two ended up having sex to give Stephanie closure. Sherry was aware of Stephanie and John's past, however, she didn't know what was like kind of currently going on, but also the whole thing made her uncomfortable in general. John swore that she was just a friend. Once John and Sherry started living together, Stephanie showed up at their apartment and was asking John if he could wax her skis. The whole thing made Sherry very uncomfortable because she showed up in very flattering gym clothing, like I guess she was just looking good, and it just made her weirded out. She felt like she was trying to get with her fiance. After Stephanie left that day, Sherry asked John once again if their relationship was really over, and he insisted that they were just friends. When Stephanie came back to pick up her skis later, it was just Sherry at home and John was at work, and Stephanie came all in her uniform. She was armed with a gun, and the whole thing just made Sherry super uncomfortable. Sherry ended up asking John to actually tell Stephanie to stop stopping by their apartment. John, however, insisted that there was nothing going on between him and Stephanie and she should just ignore her. Sherry's father claims that Stephanie visited Sherry at her office and said her relationship with John was not over, and he claims that she said, quote, "If I can't have John, no one else will." Sherry's father also claims that Sherry was terrified in the weeks leading up to her death because she felt like Stephanie Lazarus was stalking her. Nonetheless, in November 1985, Sherry and John finally got married. On the morning of February 24th of 1986, John left for work and Sherry was scheduled to give a motivational speech at work that day, but she told John she was maybe going to skip out on it and tell them that she was sick. At 9:45 a.m., a neighbor noticed that their garage door was open with no cars inside. John also made several unanswered calls to the house that day, and Sherry's sister also called the home with no answer. At around noon, two men who the neighbors said were gardeners in the compound knocked on their door and gave them a purse that was later found out to be Sherry's. They said they found in the garden. The housekeeper who was cleaning a unit nearby claimed that she heard something that sounded like two people arguing and something falling around 12:30 p.m. When John returned home that evening, he discovered that the garage door was open. Broken glass was all over the floor of the garage. The new BMW that he had bought for Sherry as a wedding present was gone. This is when John got really nervous, and of course he walked inside and sadly found Sherry dead. LAPD quickly began investigating the case, and they pretty quickly determined that this was a burglary. Sherry was wearing a bathrobe and a nightgown at the time, which made officers believe that she wasn't expecting anyone to come over. The housekeeper who reported hearing the two people arguing claimed that she did not hear any gunshots, which kind of makes no sense if you think about it, because I feel like if you were able to hear arguing in an apartment, you would certainly be able to hear gunshots. An abandoned BMW was found a week later, and unfortunately it had no information whatsoever, no evidence about what could have happened to Sherry. The only other weird thing about this case, and the only missing thing from the apartment, was John and Sherry's marriage license. Sherry had jewelry all around. She had probably expensive clothes, nice things, and the robber only took a marriage license. Like, it kind of makes absolutely no sense. Sherry's father, however, was very adamant that he believed that Stephanie Lazarus was the murderer. Unfortunately, the LAPD told him that he was watching too much TV, which I don't know if that means he was like watching too much true crime and he was like, you know, trying to come up with like a conspiracy about it. I don't know what they were trying to say to him, but it was really fucking rude. John and Stephanie briefly reunited in 1989 after he called the detectives to make sure that Stephanie had absolutely nothing to do with his wife's death, and they told him that they genuinely believed that she did not, so they began hooking up again. Stephanie continued working for the LAPD and went on to start her own private investigation firm, and she became a detective in 1993. 3 years later, she married a fellow police officer and adopted a daughter with him, and moved to Simi Valley, California. At this point, she became an instructor at Police Academy. In the late 1990s, DNA testing began to become way more prominent, and the LAPD formed a unit to look at a bunch of cold cases and try to find any new forensic evidence between the new DNA technology and the cases. In 2004, criminalist Jennifer Francis was finally able to analyze the DNA from Sherry's case, which was essentially a bite mark on Sherry's body, which was a little odd and threw the LAPD off at first, because that's kind of, I guess, a womanly move. I don't know what that means. Saliva did in fact come from a woman, and this was proven in 2004, which kind of put holes in their whole burglary theory. It's not that a woman can't be a burglar or anything, but it was just extremely unlikely at the time, and it really poked holes in their theory and made different people in the police department start to wonder what actually happened to Sherry. Upon discovering that the person who killed Sherry was in fact a female, Jennifer Francis decided to dig deeper into the case file and discovered the report of a third-party female who allegedly harassed the victim at her job and residence before her murder. Jennifer asked the detective who was supervising her about this. He said, quote, "Oh, you mean the LAPD detective? She's not a part of this." He insisted that the case was a simple burglary and there was nothing more to it. So the evidence went back into the files. In 2009, detectives once again began looking at Sherry's case. Jim Nuttall and Pete Barba found the case very interesting. Once they realized that the DNA evidence pointed to a female suspect, they considered the burglary idea to be invalid and that they had to start at the beginning of the case. The detectives began to study this case as a murder and kind of went with the idea that perhaps the person who murdered Sherry staged it as a burglary on purpose to avoid a further investigation. They ended up coming up with a list of 5 potential suspects. They were actually least suspicious of Stephanie Lazarus at the time because she was a fellow cop. But But they decided to proceed with caution because, of course, when you investigate a fellow cop, it's just not the vibe, I guess, and it's a little dicey, which we'll talk about later. But they decided to kind of go through it with secrets because 3 of the people who they had as suspects were completely ruled out. The other suspect besides Stephanie was a co-worker who ended up being ruled out by DNA proof. And so Stephanie was their only suspect at this point. Because Stephanie probably had a lot of friends in the department, her husband was in the department, they decided to keep this under lock and key and only referred to her as number 5. They worked on the case after hours and behind closed doors because obviously if you're accusing a cop of a crime and they did not commit it, it would be very, very bad. The detectives discovered that Stephanie had the same .38 caliber gun that was used to kill Sherry. She reported the gun as stolen 13 days after Sherry's death. Weird thing is that she reported it stolen not in Van Nuys, California, but in Santa Monica. The detectives actually assume that Stephanie threw her gun off of the Santa Monica pier and called in the gun as stolen. Ultimately, they knew that DNA would be the only way to officially prove that Stephanie was the murderer. But they began to theorize from a cop's perspective how they would go about covering up a murder. First, they thought it would be better to complete a murder on a day off, and Stephanie was off the day that Sherry was murdered. Secondly, they thought it would be important that a cop would use a off-duty gun because losing an on-duty gun or, you know, having anything to do with that has a lot of consequences where the off-duty guns are a little bit less secure in that way. Also, a working patrol officer would be the perfect person to know how to make a crime scene look like a burglary, just enough to satisfy an overworked detective. The detectives ended up contacting Sherry's father and he told them about how he had always thought that it was Stephanie who murdered his daughter. And he talked to the detectives about how much he believed this because of the harassment that Stephanie was spewing towards Sherry in the months leading up to her death. And the weird thing is that the cops claim that this was not at all in any of the files from the original case, even though Sherry's father insisted that he told the cops this multiple times, which is pretty big red flag. So now that Stephanie was their prime suspect, they knew they had to somehow collect a voluntary DNA sample. So the cops ended up following Stephanie to a local mall, collected her DNA from a coffee cup that she voluntarily threw away, and this ended up matching the DNA of the bite mark on Sherry's body. In June of 2009, they knew that Stephanie's arrest would have to be handled very carefully because obviously she was a dangerous woman. The detectives from the robbery homicide division ended up contacting Stephanie and told her that they would give her more information about what they needed to talk to her about once she got there. So once she got there, she would have to surrender her gun and equipment belts in order to enter the building, and so this was where they could get her unarmed in case things went bad. Detectives told her that they were trying to tie loose ends together about the Sherry case and that they wanted to do it in a private setting because she was the ex-boyfriend of John, and they didn't want the whole office to be talking about the drama, I guess.
I want to talk about this in the squad room because I don't know who people are listening. And if we go to my side, everybody's always wondering what everybody else is doing. Okay.
They talked for a bit, and Stephanie claimed to recall little from the situation.
Are you guys just friends or anything else? Or?
Yeah, we were good friends.
Yeah. Was there ever any relationship or anything that developed between you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we dated, you know, I mean, what's this all about?
Well, it's relating to his wife.
Okay.
Okay. Did you know her?
Not really. I mean, I knew that he got married years ago.
Did you ever meet her?
God, I don't know.
Do you know who she was or anything?
Well, let me think. God, it's been a long time ago. I may have met her. I think she worked at a hospital somewhere. And yeah, I may have met her at a hospital. I may have talked to her once or twice.
At a hospital?
Or more. You know.
Did you ever fight with her?
You mean like we fought?
Yeah. Did you ever duke it out with her?
No, I don't think so. I mean...
You'd remember that, right? That would be pretty...
Yeah, I would think so. I
pretty
mean,
specific.
Yeah, like I said, I mean,
dramatic.
obviously, you know, I mean, it just doesn't sound familiar.
Once she realized what was going on, she kind of like was accusing them of accusing her, and things started to go a little south.
I mean, what are they saying? So I fought with her, so now, I mean, I'm getting the jump, the leap. They're saying, okay, I fought with her, so I must have killed her. I mean, come on. I mean, that's, you know, I don't even know who these people are. I can't even say I met any of these people. I mean, it's insane. If you guys are claiming that I'm a suspect, then, you know, I got a problem with, you know, with that.
Okay.
Okay? So, you know, if you're doing this as an interrogation, you're saying, hey, I'm a suspect. Well, now I got a problem with, you know, now you're accusing me of this? Is that what you're saying?
We're trying to figure out what happened, Stephanie.
Well, I'm just saying, you know, do I need to get a lawyer if you're accusing me of this?
Obviously you know about all the DNA stuff and things of the nature that, you know, gets done on cases nowadays. You know, if we asked you for a DNA swab, would you be willing to give us one?
Maybe. Somebody would be saying that I did this. I mean, we had a fight, and so I went and killed her. I mean, come on.
Detectives asked if it would be possible for them to retrieve a DNA sample from her. She declined, but of course they already had the DNA proof, so that ended up leading to the warrant for her arrest. She left the room and was there arrested for murder.
This is insane.
Okay. Stephanie, you know you have the right to remain silent. Do you understand?
Yes.
Once she was arrested, the warrants were issued and they were able to search her home and car. And they found her journal from the mid-1980s, which had numerous mentions of her love for John and sadness over his engagement to Sherry. Her computer also showed that she had searched John's name multiple times during the late 1990s. LAPD officers were pretty stunned that Stephanie could have done something like this. She was a well-respected cop in the area, and it was just pretty crazy overall. Trial began in early 2012 and she was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison and is currently serving her sentence at the California Institute for Women in Corona, California. She's actually eligible for parole in December of 2034. I'm just like, this bitch is fucking crazy. It is so sad that this happened to Sherry, and honestly, it really freaks me the fuck out to see that there was so much clear evidence and the cops were simply just not listening to it. Like, that's kind of unheard of. Not in the cop world, but say that there was a case that didn't involve a cop and say someone was murdered and, you know, the person's father was saying, hey, this person was like threatening my daughter weeks before her murder. You would think that they would be investigated, and they would be. But the fact that she was a cop, she gets like that special treatment of not being investigated. Very fucking scary. It really is really scary, because you just know that there are so many files that get lost throughout the years because a cop was involved. Just shows how corrupt the system is, and it really freaks me out. So that is it for today's video. If you guys liked it, please give it a big thumbs up. Let me know in the comments below if there's any other true crime cases that you want me to cover. But that is it. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and subscribe for new videos every week, and I will see you guys later. Bye.